Why no contact affects avoidance more than they show. Today, I want to talk about something that might surprise you: the way no contact truly affects avoidance. At first glance, they seem unaffected, distant, and even relieved. But beneath the surface, their experience is far more complex than they let on. Avoidant attachment styles are often misunderstood. We assume that when an avoidant pulls away, they don't care. We assume that when we implement no contact, they move on without a second thought. But the truth is, avoidants feel deeply, they just don't express it the way others do. And sometimes the absence of communication impacts them more than we realize. Avoidants often appear emotionally detached, but this is not because they lack feelings. Instead, they suppress their emotions rather than processing them. This suppression is a learned coping mechanism often developed in childhood due to inconsistent or overwhelming emotional experiences. When someone with an avoidant attachment style faces emotional intensity, their instinct is to withdraw. They have trained themselves to prioritize independence and self-sufficiency, seeing emotional dependence as a weakness or a threat to their sense of stability. When no contact is initiated, an avoidant may initially appear unaffected. They might continue with their daily routines, focus on work, hobbies, or even seek new distractions. From the outside, it looks as though they have completely moved on without any emotional distress. This is because avoidants do not engage with emotions in the same immediate way that others do. While a more securely attached or anxious individual may process pain in real time, feeling sadness, grief, or loneliness right away, an avoidant suppresses these feelings before they even reach conscious awareness. This suppression is a deeply ingrained survival mechanism. To an avoidant, emotional vulnerability feels dangerous, so their nervous system automatically shuts down distressing feelings before they can fully register them. This is why they can appear cold, indifferent, or even relieved when a relationship ends. It is not that they don't care, it is that they are wired to push emotions down so quickly that they do not fully register the loss at first. This process is unconscious, meaning even they may not realize how much they are avoiding their emotions. However, emotions do not simply disappear when they are suppressed. Instead, they linger beneath the surface, waiting to be triggered at an unexpected moment. Avoidants are often unaware of the depth of their feelings until they experience a reminder of the lost connection, a familiar scent, a place they used to visit together, or a random memory that surfaces when they least expect it. When this happens, they may suddenly feel waves of emotion they thought they had avoided. This delayed reaction can be confusing for them because they have spent so much time convincing themselves they were unaffected. Another important aspect of emotional suppression in avoidance is their tendency to intellectualize their emotions. Rather than sitting with their feelings and processing them, they often rationalize the situation. They may tell themselves that the relationship wasn't right, that their partner was too needy, or that they are simply better off alone. This narrative helps them maintain the illusion of emotional control, reinforcing their belief that distancing themselves was the right choice. However, these thoughts are not a reflection of their true feelings, but rather a defense mechanism designed to protect them from emotional pain. Ironically, the more an avoidant suppresses their emotions, the more power those emotions hold over them. Over time, repressed feelings can manifest in unexpected ways, such as restlessness, irritability, or even physical symptoms like fatigue or tension. Some avoidants may suddenly feel a sense of emptiness or loneliness without understanding why. These unresolved emotions can also resurface in future relationships, creating patterns where they repeatedly push people away before they get too close, only to feel regret once the connection is lost. In the context of no contact, this suppression and delayed reaction create a paradox. Initially, the avoidant may appear indifferent, reinforcing the belief that they never cared in the first place. But as time passes and their suppressed emotions begin to surface, they may find themselves struggling with feelings they cannot easily explain. They may miss their former partner, but feel unable to reach out due to their deep-seated fear of vulnerability. Instead of expressing their emotions directly, they may engage in indirect behaviors, checking social media, reminiscing about past conversations, or even casually mentioning their ex to mutual friends. While it may seem like avoidants move on effortlessly, the reality is far more complex. Their emotional detachment is a defense mechanism, not an absence of feeling. No contact forces them to sit with their unresolved emotions, even if they do not openly acknowledge them. When a relationship ends or no contact is initiated, most people experience an immediate emotional reaction. Those with anxious or secure attachment styles typically process their feelings in real time, feeling sadness, longing, or even relief depending on the circumstances. However, avoidants experience emotions differently. Instead of reacting immediately, they suppress and delay their emotional response. This happens because their nervous system is wired to push away emotional distress rather than confront it. At the onset of no contact, an avoidant often appears unaffected. They may seem indifferent, continue with their daily routines, or even engage in new activities to occupy their time. To an outsider, it looks as if they have completely moved on without a second thought. This outward detachment is a result of their subconscious defense mechanism. Avoidants have learned to deal with emotional pain by burying it deep inside, often without realizing they are doing so. Unlike someone with an anxious attachment style who immediately feels the weight of separation, an avoidant's emotions are placed on hold. This delay happens because avoidants instinctively compartmentalize their emotions. Instead of allowing themselves to feel loss or sadness, they intellectualize the situation. They may convince themselves that the relationship wasn't right, that their ex-partner was too needy, or that they are better off alone. These thoughts serve as a protective barrier, shielding them from emotional pain in the short term. However, emotions do not simply disappear just because they are ignored. They remain suppressed, only to resurface at an unexpected time. For many avoidants, the realization of loss happens gradually. In the beginning, they might feel a sense of relief because no contact removes the pressure of emotional closeness, something they often struggle with. But as time goes on and the absence of their partner becomes more apparent, their suppressed feelings start to surface. This can happen in various ways. Perhaps they hear a song that reminds them of their relationships, see a photo that brings back memories, or visit a place they once enjoyed together. These small triggers can unexpectedly bring forth emotions they thought they had successfully buried. One of the biggest misconceptions about avoidance is that they do not care when a relationship ends. The truth is they do care. They just process their emotions on a delayed timeline. While an anxious individual might feel the pain of separation immediately, an avoidant experiences it weeks or even months later. This is because their primary instinct is to avoid discomfort, which includes emotional pain. But avoidance is not the same as healing. When an avoidant suppresses their emotions for too long, they can manifest in other ways, such as feelings of emptiness, sudden waves of nostalgia, or even difficulty focusing on daily tasks. This delayed reaction can create a complicated dynamic, especially when it comes to reconnecting. By the time an avoidant realizes they miss their ex-partner, that person may have already moved on. Since avoidants struggle with vulnerability, reaching out and admitting their feelings can feel incredibly difficult, sometimes even impossible. Instead of directly expressing their emotions, they may resort to indirect behaviors, checking their ex's social media, bringing them up in casual conversations, or even trying to appear unaffected to regain a sense of control. Another key factor in an avoidance delayed reaction is the fear of abandonment that lingers beneath their need for independence. While they push people away to maintain emotional safety, they also fear being forgotten. No contact forces them to sit with this fear, even if they do not consciously acknowledge it. When they start to sense that the other person has truly moved on, their emotions, which have been suppressed for so long, can hit them all at once. This can lead to feelings of regret, loneliness, and sometimes even confusion as they struggle to make sense of emotions they have spent so much time avoiding. Ultimately, no contact does affect avoidance. It just takes longer for them to feel the full impact. Their outward indifference is not a reflection of their true feelings, but rather a coping mechanism designed to delay emotional discomfort. Over time, as the weight of their suppressed emotions grows, they are forced to confront the very feelings they work so hard to ignore. For an avoidant, control is one of the most important aspects of their emotional world. They have spent much of their lives learning how to regulate their emotions by creating distance, setting boundaries, and ensuring that they are not too dependent on anyone. Emotional closeness can feel overwhelming to them, as it triggers fears of engulfment, obligation, or vulnerability. Because of this, they often take a step back in relationships when they feel things are becoming too intense. They may withdraw, minimize their emotions, or even convince themselves that they do not need the relationship at all. When no contact is initiated, it disrupts this delicate balance of control. At first, an avoidant might see no contact as a relief. It removes the pressure of intimacy, allows them to return to their comfort zone, and reinforces their belief that they are better off alone. This initial reaction is not because they do not care, but because they are wired to prioritize self-sufficiency over emotional dependence. However, as time passes, a deeper, more complex reaction begins to emerge. One of the biggest fears an avoidant has is losing control of a situation. In relationships, they often manage their emotions by keeping others at a distance, setting the pace of intimacy, and deciding when they engage and disengage. They feel safe when they are the ones who determine the level of connection. No contact takes that power away from them. Suddenly, they are no longer in charge of when or how communication happens. They cannot dictate the terms of interaction, and for an avoidant, this lack of control can be unsettling. At first, they may rationalize the situation to maintain their sense of control. They might tell themselves that the other person is just being dramatic, that they needed space anyway, or that they would not have reached out even if no contact had not been initiated. This self-talk helps them feel like they are still in charge of the situation. However, as time goes on, the reality of the absence begins to sink in. They start to wonder why their ex has not reached out. They may have expected a message, a sign of lingering attachment, or some indication that they are still wanted. When none of that happens, the avoidant's usual sense of emotional control begins to erode. This loss of control creates an internal conflict for them. On one hand, they value independence and distance, so they do not want to be the one to break the silence. On the other hand, the complete lack of communication triggers a deep, often subconscious fear. What if they were wrong in assuming they did not need this person? What if their ex has truly moved on? These thoughts can be incredibly uncomfortable for an avoidant as they force them to confront emotions they have spent years suppressing. Another layer of this struggle is the avoidant's difficulty in expressing vulnerability. Even if they do miss their ex, reaching out would require them to admit to feelings they have tried so hard to ignore. This can feel like a loss of control in itself. Many avoidants would rather suffer in silence than risk appearing emotionally exposed. Instead of directly addressing their feelings, they may engage in indirect behaviors, including engaging in indirect behaviors to check ex's social media, reminiscing about past conversations, or finding excuses to interact with mutual friends to gather information. The more time that passes in no contact, the greater the fear of permanently losing control. By the time an avoidant realizes they may want to reconnect, they also face the possibility that it is too late. This paradox is what makes no contact particularly powerful when dealing with avoidance. It removes their ability to dictate the flow of the relationship, forces them to sit with their emotions, and ultimately makes them confront the consequences of their distancing behaviors. Whether or not they act on these emotions is another matter, but deep down, the fear of losing control weighs heavily on them. Avoidants are often perceived as emotionally distant individuals who do not need or crave deep connections. They project an image of self-sufficiency and independence, convincing themselves and others that they are perfectly fine on their own. However, beneath this exterior lies a subconscious longing for connection, even if they are not fully aware of it. Their attachment style does not mean they do not want love or companionship. It simply means they struggle to navigate it in a healthy way. When no contact is initiated, an avoidant's first reaction is often relief. They may feel as though a weight has been lifted off their shoulders because they no longer have to manage the emotional intensity of the relationship. Avoidants fear closeness not because they do not care, but because deep emotional bonds can make them feel trapped or overwhelmed. The space created by no contact initially aligns with their comfort zone, reinforcing their belief that independence is what they truly need. However, as time passes, a subconscious shift begins to take place. Even though they may not consciously acknowledge it, the absence of connection starts to affect them. Human beings, regardless of attachment style, are wired for attachment. Even the most dismissive avoidant still has a fundamental need for love and emotional support. Avoidants simply process this need differently, often by suppressing it until it becomes unavoidable. No contact removes the reassurance that the other person is still there in the background. Before, even if an avoidant withdrew or created emotional distance, they often knew their partner would reach out eventually. This dynamic allowed them to feel in control while still maintaining a sense of connection. But when no contact is in place, the avoidant is left with silence, the expected messages do not come, and the comfort of knowing they are still wanted begins to fade. At first, an avoidant might not recognize this as longing. Instead, they may experience it as restlessness, irritation, or a vague feeling that something is missing. They might immerse themselves in work, hobbies, or distractions, attempting to push down any emotions that threaten to surface. However, emotions have a way of making themselves known even when ignored. Certain triggers, an old photo, a familiar scent, a memory, can unexpectedly stir feelings of nostalgia and longing. The subconscious mind does not easily forget deep emotional connections. Even if an avoidant tries to move on logically, their emotions may lag behind, creating an internal conflict. They may start to wonder why their ex has not reached out. They may check social media or think about sending a casual message, but stop themselves because reaching out feels like a loss of control. Instead of directly addressing their emotions, they try to rationalize them, convincing themselves that the relationship was not right, that they were better off alone, or that their ex has already moved on. Despite this rationalization, the longing does not entirely disappear. If no contact continues for long enough, the avoidant may begin to miss not just the person, but the sense of connection they provided. This is where an avoidant's inner conflict intensifies. They crave closeness, but they also fear it. They want to reach out, but they hesitate because vulnerability feels dangerous to them. The more time that passes, passes, the greater the uncertainty becomes. They may wonder if their ex is truly gone, if they have moved on, and if the connection they once took for granted has slipped away permanently. Avoidants often struggle to recognize their own emotions in real time. It may take weeks or even months before they fully process the impact of no contact. Unlike anxious individuals who feel the pain of separation immediately, avoidants suppress it until it becomes too strong to ignore. By the time they acknowledge their longing, they may feel stuck, uncertain about how to bridge the gap, unsure of how to express their emotions, and afraid of rejection. This internal struggle keeps them in a cycle of avoiding and longing, making no contact far more impactful than they initially expected. Avoidants often rely on a sense of control in their relationships, using emotional distance as a protective barrier. They maintain a subconscious belief that keeping people at arm's length shields them from vulnerability and emotional pain. Throughout a relationship, an avoidant may pull away when they feel too emotionally exposed, creating space between themselves and their partner as a way to regain their sense of independence. They believe that if they can keep their emotions in check, they will avoid getting hurt. However, no contact disrupts this strategy in ways they do not anticipate. When an avoidant distances themselves from a relationship, they typically assume that the connection will remain intact on some level. Even if they push their partner away, they often believe that person will still be there, reaching out occasionally or waiting in the background. This unspoken reassurance allows them to feel safe in their avoidance. It gives them the illusion of having space while still maintaining an underlying emotional tie. However, when no contact is implemented, that safety net disappears entirely. The person they assumed would always be available is suddenly gone, and for an avoidant, this realization can be deeply unsettling. At first, they may not consciously acknowledge the impact of this shift. They may tell themselves that they are relieved, that they needed space, or that the relationship was not as meaningful as their ex believed it was. They might even feel a temporary sense of freedom, thinking they have successfully avoided the emotional complications of a breakup. But as time passes, their avoidance strategy begins to backfire. The absence of communication forces them to confront an unfamiliar reality. They no longer have access to the person they pushed away. One of the most challenging aspects of no contact for an avoidant is the unexpected loss of control. Avoidants like to believe they are the ones in charge of when and how a relationship progresses or ends. They often assume that if they ever want to reconnect, they can simply return when they are ready. But when their ex does not reach out, they begin to question that assumption. The dynamic they counted on, the one where they hold the power to engage or withdraw, is no longer in play. They are no longer the ones deciding when communication happens. And this reversal of control can create internal turmoil. As more time passes without contact, an avoidant may start to feel an unfamiliar sense of discomfort. They might not immediately recognize it as longing or regret because they are so used to suppressing their emotions. Instead, they may experience it as irritability, restlessness, or an inability to focus. Small reminders of their ex, an inside joke, a song, a certain routine, may trigger unexpected emotional reactions. These moments disrupt their carefully maintained emotional detachment, forcing them to confront feelings they have been avoiding. This internal struggle can create a paradox. On one hand, avoidants do not want to admit they miss their ex because doing so would require vulnerability. On the other hand, they cannot ignore the fact that the connection they once took for granted is slipping away. The more they resist acknowledging their emotions, the more they feel an increasing sense of discomfort. Over time, they may begin to experience regret, not just for losing their ex, but for underestimating the depth of their own feelings. By the time an avoidant realizes they have lost control of the situation, they may feel stuck. Reaching out would mean confronting their emotions directly, something they have spent years avoiding, yet staying silent only prolongs their sense of unease. No contact forces them to sit with this dilemma, highlighting the ways in which their avoidance strategies have ultimately worked against them. Rather than protecting them from emotional pain, their detachment has led them to an outcome they never intended, one where they are left questioning whether they made the right choice at all. Avoidants often build their identity around the idea of self-sufficiency. They believe they do not need deep emotional connections to be happy and that relying on others is a sign of weakness. This belief is rooted in their past experiences where they may have learned that vulnerability leads to disappointment or rejection. Because of this, they prioritize independence above all else, convincing themselves that they are better off alone. However, no contact challenges this belief in a way they do not expect. When their ex implements no contact, an avoidant initially feels justified in their decision to detach. They may see it as confirmation that they were right to protect themselves from emotional dependence. At first, they feel comfortable with the silence, viewing it as a return to the independence they value so much. But as time goes on, something starts to shift. The absence of contact does not just remove their ex from their life, it also removes the validation they unknowingly relied on. Even though avoidants push people away, they still find comfort in knowing that someone cares about them. They may not openly express it, but the knowledge that their ex was always willing to reach out, check in, or fight for the relationship provided them with a sense of security. It reinforced their belief that they could maintain distance without truly losing the connection. However, when no contact is enforced and their ex does not reach out, that sense of security is suddenly gone. This can lead to an identity crisis for the avoidant. They built their self-esteem around being emotionally independent, but now they are faced with an unexpected realization they do care and they do feel the loss. This challenges the belief they have held for so long that they do not need anyone. The realization that someone they once meant something to has truly moved on can be unsettling. It forces them to confront feelings they have spent years avoiding. By the time they recognize what they have lost, they may feel conflicted about reaching out. Doing so would mean acknowledging their emotions, something they have spent a lifetime suppressing. Yet staying silent only amplifies their discomfort. No contact in this way not only affects avoidance emotionally, but also forces them to question their own sense of self, making it far more impactful than they ever anticipated. No contact is often seen as a strategy to heal, gain clarity, or move forward after a breakup. But for avoidants, it does something even more profound. It forces them to confront the very emotions they have spent years suppressing. At first, they may seem unaffected, appearing as if they have seamlessly moved on. But as time passes, the reality of loss begins to sink in. The absence of communication disrupts their sense of control, triggers subconscious longing, and challenges the belief that they do not need connection. Avoidants are not emotionless. They simply process feelings differently. While they may initially suppress their emotions, no contact removes the safety net they unknowingly relied on. It forces them to sit with their discomfort, making them realize that distance does not erase attachment. And by the time they come to terms with what they have lost, the dynamic has often shifted. The person they once pushed away may have truly moved on. This is why no contact affects avoidance more than show. It does not just remove a person from their life. It removes the illusion of control, the comfort of knowing someone is always there, and the ability to avoid emotional consequences indefinitely. In the end, no contact is not just about silence. It is about transformation. It shifts the power, forces introspection, and sometimes even sparks the very emotions an avoidant was trying to escape. Thank you all for taking the time to listen to this speech. Understanding attachment styles, especially avoidant attachment, is a powerful step toward healthier relationships and personal growth. Whether you are going through a no-contact period yourself or simply trying to understand someone with an avoidant mindset, I hope this has provided clarity and insight. To those who struggle with emotional closeness or have been affected by someone with an avoidant attachment style, remember that awareness is the first step toward healing. Relationships are complex, but self-awareness and emotional growth can help bridge the gaps that attachment styles create. Thank you again for your time, your openness, and your willingness to learn about this important topic.